The night the heir called for his wolf, something else answered. Not the familiar pull of instinct. Not the surge of power every heir is born to command. Not the bond that ties blood to legacy. Something else. The moon was full that night. It should have been a blessing. A witness. A crown waiting to be claimed. Instead, it became a judge. Cold. Distant. Watching from a sky that offered light to everyone, except him. Below it, carved into the heart of ancient stone and shadow, the sacred grounds stood alive with anticipation. Torches burned along the outer ring, their flames bending in the wind like they, too, were waiting. The air carried the scent of damp earth, iron, and something sharper. Expectation. They had all come to see it. Elders draped in ceremonial robes. Warriors standing like statues of carved steel. Nobles with eyes that measured worth in silence. And beyond them, the pack. Hundreds of them. Watching, waiting, judging. At the center of it all stood the heir. Kael. He didn't look like someone about to fail. He looked exactly as they had always expected him to look. Strong. Composed. Unshaken. But looks can lie. His chest rose slowly, then fell, each breath just a little tighter than the last. His hands hung at his sides, fingers flexing once, twice, like he was trying to hold onto something slipping just beyond reach. Because deep inside, where his wolf should have been, there was only silence. Not absence. Not emptiness. Silence. And that was worse. Much worse. Step forward. The voice cut through the air like a blade drawn from its sheath. Authority. Absolute. Kael didn't need to turn to know who had spoken. His father. The Alpha King. Standing just beyond him. Tall. Immovable. Draped in power that didn't need to be proven. Kael obeyed. Of course he did. His boots scraped lightly against the stone as he stepped forward into the center of the circle. The place where heirs became legends. Or something far worse. The torches flickered. The wind shifted. And for a brief moment, everything felt wrong, like the world itself was holding its breath. Kael lifted his gaze. The crowd blurred at the edges. The elders stood still as carved statues. But his focus, his entire world, narrowed to one figure. The Alpha King did not look at him. Not fully. Not as a father would. His gaze rested somewhere beyond Kael's shoulder. Distant, detached, as if what stood before him was not a son, but a test. Tonight, one of the elders began, his voice old but unshaking. We witness the Rite of Ascension. Each word fell heavy, measured, final. The heir will call his wolf and claim his place. A murmur rippled through the crowd, low, controlled, but impossible to ignore. This was the moment Kael had been prepared for since the day he could walk. The moment he had bled for, trained for, endured for. The moment that would define him, or destroy him. The elder's gaze shifted to him. Sharp, knowing. Step fully into the circle, heir. Kael moved again. One more step. And something inside him tightened. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something older. Something that had been whispering for years and had never once given him an answer. He ignored it. He had always ignored it. Because tonight wasn't about doubt. It was about proof. Call it, the elder said. Simple. Direct. Unforgiving. Kael closed his eyes. The world fell away. The torches. The crowd. The weight of expectation pressing down from every direction. Gone. He reached inward. Past thought, past breath, past the surface of who he was, and into the place where instinct lived, where power waited, where his wolf should have been. He had done this before, hundreds of times, in silence, in secret, in desperation, and every time there had been something, faint, distant, just enough to believe it was real, just enough to hope. So he reached again, deeper this time, calling. Not with words, but with everything he was. Everything he had been told he was meant to be. The heir. The future. The alpha. Waiting. Listening. Expecting. Something. Anything. A growl. A spark. A presence rising to meet him. But instead, There was nothing.
No.
Not nothing. Silence. The kind that presses in. The kind that suffocates. The kind that tells you, without words, that something is terribly wrong. Kael's brow tightened. His breathing faltered. Just slightly. But enough. Enough for those watching to notice. Enough for the air to shift. He tried again. Harder. Forcing his focus deeper, pushing past the resistance that shouldn't have been there. Calling louder. Demanding. Begging. Still nothing. A whisper stirred at the edge of the crowd. Then another. Then another.
Small.
At first. Barely there. But growing. Why hasn't he shifted? He's delaying. No, something's wrong. Kael heard them. Even through the silence. Even through the pressure building inside his chest. He tried again. And again. And again. Each attempt sharper. More desperate. More strained. Until the effort itself began to crack. His control slipping. His breath coming faster now. Too fast. The silence didn't break. It deepened. And then, a voice.
Low.
Cold. Unmoved. Enough. Kael's eyes snapped open. The world rushed back in all at once. The torches. The crowd. The whispers that were no longer whispers. And his father. The Alpha King was watching him now. Fully. Completely. And there was no pride in his gaze. No patience. No understanding. Only judgment. Call your wolf, the Alpha King said. Not a request. A command. Kael swallowed. His throat felt tight.
Dry.
I am trying. A flicker. Just a flicker. Something unreadable passed through the Alpha King's eyes. Then it vanished. Trying is not enough. The words landed like stone. Heavy. Unforgiving. The crowd shifted. The whispers grew louder. No longer hidden. No longer cautious. He hasn't shifted. He can't. That's impossible. Kael turned his head slightly. Just enough to see them. Faces he had grown up with. Fought beside. Laughed with. Now watching him like something unfamiliar. Something wrong. His chest tightened. Not from effort this time. From something else. Something colder. He closed his eyes again. Not out of ritual. Out of desperation. Reached inward. But this time, he didn't call gently. He didn't wait. He forced it. Pushed deeper than he ever had before. Past the silence. Past the emptiness. Into something
Else.
And for a moment, just a moment, something answered. Not a wolf. Not a presence he recognized. Something darker. Heavier. Watching him back. Kael's breath caught. His eyes snapped open. Too fast. Too sharp. Like he had touched something he wasn't meant to. The connection vanished instantly.
Gone.
Like it had never been there. But the feeling lingered. Cold.
Alive. Wrong.
A ripple moved through him. Subtle. But real. And the world seemed to feel it. The torches flickered harder. The wind stilled. Even the whispers faltered. Just for a second. Then, they're waiting, the Alpha King said.
Flat.
Controlled. Final. Kael looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time,
He saw it.
not anger. Not disappointment. Something worse. Decision. Already made. And, in that moment, Kael understood. This wasn't about whether he could do it anymore. This was about what happened, because he couldn't. His hands trembled slightly. He clenched them into fists. Tried one last time. Not with hope. Not with belief. But with everything he had left. Everything. He reached inward, and the silence answered him again. Complete. Absolute. Unforgiving. A breath passed through the crowd. Sharp. Collective. Final. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Not his. Never his. The sound echoed across the stone and into the sky, swallowed by the moonlight that still refused to touch him. Kael lowered his head. Just slightly. Not in surrender. Not yet. But something close. Because deep down, he already knew. This moment, this failure, would change everything. Forever. And as the silence settled in around him like a verdict waiting to be spoken, One truth became impossible to ignore. He had called for his wolf, and something had answered, just not what anyone, not even him, was prepared to face. Because what answered him was never meant to exist. The kingdom had always been built on one truth. Strength decides everything. Not birth alone, not titles, not promises whispered over a cradle.
Strength.
It was written into their laws, carved into stone, etched into memory long before Kael was ever born. In this world, a wolf was not just power. It was identity. Without it, you were nothing. The mountains that surrounded the kingdom rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks cutting into the sky as if even the heavens had to make space for what ruled beneath them. Forests stretched endlessly between those stone walls, dark, alive, filled with the quiet movement of creatures that understood the hierarchy better than any human ever could. Because here, even the wild obeyed strength. At the heart of it all stood the stronghold. Not a palace, not a home, a fortress, black stone, towering spires, walls that had never fallen. It wasn't built for beauty. It was built to endure. And inside those walls, legacy lived. Bloodlines that stretched back centuries. Names spoken with reverence. Power passed from one generation to the next, not by inheritance alone, but by proof. Every heir had to earn it. Every heir had to stand beneath the full moon and call forth the one thing that defined them. Their wolf. It wasn't optional. It wasn't symbolic. It was law. The Rite of Ascension. The night everything was decided. And for Kael, that night had been waiting for him his entire life. From the moment he could stand, he had been shaped for it. Trained before sunrise. Tested after sunset. Pushed until weakness burned out of him. Or, at least, that was the intention. Steel met steel in the training grounds as the memory surfaced. Echoes of countless mornings spent under a sky that hadn't yet decided to be light. Again, the Alpha King's voice had commanded. Always the same. Cold.
Precise.
Unyielding. Kael had been younger then. Smaller. Faster. But not yet strong enough to match the man standing across from him. His father. The Alpha King didn't train him like a son. He trained him like a weapon. Kael lunged. The strike was clean. Calculated. Exactly as he had been taught. And still, it wasn't enough. The Alpha King moved once. Just once. And Kael was on the ground before he understood what had happened. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Pain flared across his ribs. The taste of iron filled his mouth. Again. No anger. No encouragement. Just expectation. Kael pushed himself up.
Ignored the pain.
Adjusted his stance.
Tried again. And again.
And again. Each failure met with the same response. No praise. No correction. Just. Again. Because in this kingdom, effort meant nothing. Only results mattered. And Kael had learned that lesson early. Too early. By the age of 10, he had already surpassed warriors twice his size. By 15, he had become something else entirely.
Faster.
Sharper. More controlled. The perfect heir. That's what they called him. The one who would lead them into the next era. The one who would carry the bloodline forward without question. Without weakness. Without doubt. But perfection is often a performance. And Kael had been performing for years. Because there was something no one saw. Something no one knew. Something he had buried so deep, even he had almost convinced himself it didn't matter. His wolf. Or rather, the absence of it. The first time he noticed it, he was 8. Too young to understand what it meant, but old enough to feel that something was wrong. The other children had shifted easily. Clumsy at first. Uncontrolled.
Wild.
But real. They laughed about it. Fought over it. Compared their transformations like it was a game. Kael had smiled. Pretended. Waited for his turn. It never came. At first, he thought it was just late. That his would be stronger. That it would take more time. That when it came, it would be worth the wait. So he trained harder. Pushed further. Listened more carefully during every lesson the elders gave about control, connection, instinct. Your wolf is not separate from you. One of them had said, voice calm, measured, absolute. It is you, the part of you that does not think, only knows. Kael had nodded, closed his eyes, reached inward, and found nothing. Not resistance, not confusion, nothing.
Just a stillness that didn't belong.
He didn't tell anyone. He couldn't, because even then he understood the truth. No wolf meant no future.
So he adapted.
He learned how to mimic what he couldn't feel, how to move like someone who had already bonded with their wolf, how to fight with instinct he didn't actually possess, how to become convincing. And it worked.
Too well.
Years passed. No one questioned him. No one doubted him. Why would they? He was stronger than most, faster than all, disciplined beyond his years. Everything an heir should be. Everything except complete focus. The voice snapped him back to the present. Kael stood in the inner training chamber now, the stone walls close, the air thick with heat and tension. A single torch burned in the corner, casting long shadows that moved when he did. He faced his reflection. Not in glass. In polished steel. A blade. The same one he had trained with since he was old enough to hold it. He raised it slowly. Watched the way his grip tightened. Steady. Controlled. Perfect. Just like always. But his eyes, they gave him away. There was something there. Something just beneath the surface. A question he had never allowed himself to fully ask. Where are you? The words left his lips before he could stop them.
Soft.
Barely audible. But in the silence of the chamber, they echoed. No answer came. Of course it didn't. It never had. Kael exhaled slowly, lowered the blade, and for a moment, just a moment, the weight of it all pressed in. Not the expectations, not the pressure, the truth. The truth he had been outrunning his entire life. The right was coming. Not someday. Not in the distant future.
Soon.
Too soon. And when it came, there would be no hiding, no pretending, no second chances. You either called your wolf, or you didn't. And if you didn't, everything ended. A knock sounded against the chamber door. Sharp, deliberate. Kael straightened instantly. The moment gone. The mask returning. Enter. The door opened. One of the royal guards stepped inside, armor gleaming faintly in the low light. He bowed his head slightly, not out of respect for Kael, but for what Kael represented. The council is gathered, the guard said. Preparations for the rite are underway. Kael nodded once.
Calm.
Unshaken. Exactly as expected. I'll be there shortly. The guard hesitated, just briefly, then added, the entire pack will attend. Of course they would. They always did. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was a judgment. A public one. The guard left. The door closed. And the silence returned. Kael stood there for a long moment. Then another. Then slowly, he set the blade down, turned away from his reflection, and began walking toward the door. Each step steady, measured, controlled. But inside, something shifted. Not his wolf. Not power. Something else. Something quieter. More dangerous.
Doubt.
It crept in slowly, unnoticed at first, then impossible to ignore. What if it didn't come? The thought hit harder than any strike he had ever taken. He stopped just short of the door, his hand hovering over the handle, breath slowing, mind racing. He had never allowed that question to exist. Not fully. Not like this. Because asking it meant facing something he wasn't ready to face.
But now,
there was no avoiding it. The right would not wait. The moon would not hesitate. And the pack would not forgive. Kael closed his eyes. Just for a second. Reached inward. One last time. Hoping. Expecting. Needing. Something. Anything. The silence answered him. As it always did. And this time, it felt heavier. Final. Unchanging. Kael opened his eyes. His hand tightened on the door. And for the first time in his life, the perfect heir hesitated. Not because he was afraid to fail, but because he wasn't sure he could succeed. And as that realization settled in, slow, cold, undeniable, One thought rose above all the others.
Clear. Sharp.
Unforgiving. For the first time in his life, Kael wasn't sure his wolf would answer. The night did not begin with silence. It began with movement, slow at first, measured, deliberate, like something ancient stirring beneath the surface of the world. Torches were lit one by one along the outer ring of the sacred grounds, each flame catching, rising, bending with the wind as if acknowledging what was to come. Shadows stretched across stone and earth, long and restless, weaving between pillars carved with the history of those who had stood here before.
Heirs.
Alphas. Failures. Legends. Tonight another name would be decided. The gathering had begun. They came from every corner of the territory. Warriors in dark leathers marked with the scars of battle. Nobles wrapped in furs that spoke of lineage and power. Elders moving slowly, their presence heavier than the stones beneath their feet. And then, the heirs. Some confident, some cautious, some watching far too closely. Because this was not just Kael's night. It was a measure of them all. If the Alpha King's own son could falter, then no one was untouchable. The thought lingered, unspoken, dangerous. At the edge of the clearing, Kael stood in shadow. Not hidden, not exactly, but not yet seen. The sounds reached him first. Low voices, muted laughter, the subtle shift of bodies adjusting as the crowd grew. It should have felt familiar, comforting even. This was his world, his people, his future. But tonight, it felt different.
Off.
Like something beneath the surface had shifted just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be understood. His gaze moved slowly across the clearing. Every detail sharpened. Every movement too clear. Too loud. The flicker of firelight against armor. The glint of eyes watching the center of the circle. The space where he would soon stand. Waiting. Always waiting.
Kael.
The voice came from his left.
Low. Controlled.
Kael didn't turn immediately. He knew that voice. Had grown up with it. Competed against it. Measured himself against it more times than he could count. Still hiding in the shadows. Kael exhaled quietly before shifting his gaze. Riven. Another heir. Not of the main bloodline, but close enough to matter. Strong. Ambitious. And watching him now with a look that hovered somewhere between curiosity and something sharper. I prefer to observe before stepping into a crowd that's already decided what it expects to see, Kael replied. Riven smirked slightly. Careful, he said. That almost sounded like doubt. Kael held his gaze. Unblinking. Does it? A pause.
Short.
But heavy. Riven studied him for a moment longer than necessary, like he was looking for something. A crack. A weakness.
A sign.
Just call it, Riven said finally, voice dropping lower. That's all they care about. Kael didn't respond. Riven tilted his head slightly. Just feel it, he added, almost casually. The words landed harder than they should have, because Kael had heard them before. Many times. From many voices. Trainers. Elders. Even himself.
Just call it.
Just feel it. As if it were simple. As if it were guaranteed. As if everyone wasn't pretending they understood something that had never once answered him. Riven stepped back. Not retreating. Just done. For what it's worth, he said, glancing toward the center of the clearing. I hope you don't fail. Kael raised an eyebrow slightly. Hope. Riven's expression didn't change. If you fall, the entire system cracks, he said. And some of us aren't ready for what comes after that. Then he turned, walked away, leaving Kael alone again. But not untouched. The words lingered, not the surface meaning. The implication beneath it. If you fall. Kael looked toward the center of the clearing again. Toward the circle. Toward the place where everything would be decided. Something felt
wrong.
Subtle.
Faint. But there.
Like a misstep in a rhythm everyone else seemed to follow effortlessly. He closed his eyes briefly. Not fully. Just enough to retreat inward. To reach.
To check.
To confirm what he already knew. Nothing answered. The connection wasn't there. His jaw tightened. He opened his eyes again quickly, too quickly. Like he didn't want to stay in that silence any longer than necessary. Movement at the far end of the clearing drew his attention. The crowd shifted, parted, not in fear, in respect. The Alpha King had arrived. He didn't announce himself.
He didn't need to.
His presence moved through the space like a force, steady, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter faded. Even the torches seemed to steady their flames. He walked through the crowd without looking at anyone, not because they didn't matter, but because he didn't need to acknowledge them to command them. Power didn't ask for attention. It took it. Kael watched him.
Carefully.
Measured. There was something about the way his father moved tonight. Something sharper. More final. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just purpose. As if the outcome of this night had already been decided. The thought hit harder than it should have. Kael straightened slightly, forced the tension from his shoulders, controlled his breathing. He had done this before. Not here. Not like this. But he had faced pressure. Faced expectation. He knew how to hold himself together. He knew how to perform. That's all this was. Another moment. Another test. Another. A memory cut through his thoughts. Uninvited. Uncontrolled. He was younger again. Much younger. Standing alone beneath a smaller moon, hidden deep within the forest where no one would see him. No expectations. No watching eyes. Just him. And the silence. Come on, his younger voice had whispered.
Soft.
Hopeful. Desperate in a way he hadn't yet learned to hide. I know you're there.
He had closed his eyes then too.
Reached inward.
Called gently.
Like he had been taught. Like it was supposed to work. And for a moment, he thought he felt something. A flicker. A shift. A presence just beyond reach. His heart had raced. Hope rising too fast. Too bright. He had pushed closer. Reached harder. And then, nothing.
Gone.
Like it had never been there. The silence had returned. Worse than before. Because now, he knew what it felt like to almost have something. Almost. Kael blinked. The memory snapped. The present rushed back in. The crowd. The torches. The weight of the night pressing down on him from every direction. He inhaled slowly. Held it. Released it just as carefully. Control. Always control. He stepped forward. Out of the shadows. Into the light. The shift was immediate. Eyes turned. Conversation stopped. The weight of attention settled on him like something physical. Heavy. Unavoidable. This was what they had come to see. The perfect heir. The future alpha. The one who would not fail. Kael walked with measured precision. Every step placed exactly where it needed to be. Every movement controlled. Calculated. Unshaken. Because that was what they expected. Because that was what he had always given them. Because anything less would be noticed. The closer he got to the center, the quieter the world became. Not silent. Never silent. But focused. Condensed. Every sound narrowing into something sharper. The crackle of fire. The shift of fabric. The faint, uneven rhythm of his own heartbeat. He stepped into the outer edge of the circle. Stopped. Just for a moment. Not hesitation. Positioning. The elders stood across from him now. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. The Alpha King stood above them slightly, elevated by the stone platform behind the circle.
Still.
Unmoving. Unyielding. Their eyes met. Only for a second. But it was enough. Kael saw it again. That same thing. That same certainty. As if this moment, this outcome, was already known. A flicker of something passed through Kael's chest. Sharp. Unwelcome. He pushed it down instantly. There was no room for that. Not here.
Not now.
Take your place. The elder's voice carried across the clearing.
Calm.
Unemotional. Final. Kael moved forward. Into the center. Into the space that would decide everything. The ground beneath his feet felt different here. Colder. Heavier. As if it remembered every failure that had ever happened upon it. As if it knew something he didn't. He stood still. Hands at his sides. Head high. Breath steady. Every inch of him exactly as it should be. Except, inside. He reached again. Carefully this time. Quietly. testing, searching. Just call it. The thought came unbidden. Just feel it. He pushed deeper, ignoring the growing tightness in his chest, ignoring the subtle, creeping unease, ignoring the truth he had spent years avoiding.
Come on.
Nothing. Not even a flicker. Something felt wrong. Not new, not sudden, but undeniable now. The connection wasn't there.
Not weak.
Not distant.
Gone.
Completely. A ripple moved through the crowd.
Small.
But spreading. They could feel it. Not what he was feeling, but the absence of what should have been there. Kael's breathing slowed.
Forced.
Controlled. But just beneath it, something else was rising. Not panic. Not yet. Something closer to realization. And that was worse. Because realization didn't leave room for denial. The elder lifted his staff. The motion alone was enough to silence what little noise remained. All eyes fixed on Kael. All expectations focused into a single point. The moment had come. There would be no more waiting. No more delay. No more time to prepare. The ritual had reached its peak. Kael stood at its center. And for the first time, he felt it fully. The pressure. Not from the crowd. Not from his father. From the truth. The truth he could no longer outrun. He closed his eyes. Just once more. Reached inward. And found the same silence waiting for him. Unchanged. Unbroken. Final. His fingers curled slightly at his sides. His jaw tightened. And somewhere deep inside, something began to fracture. Not loudly. Not visibly. But enough. Enough to matter. The elder's voice rose.
Clear.
Commanding. Unavoidable. And just beyond him, the Alpha King stepped forward. The movement was subtle, but it shifted everything. Power realigning. Authority taking its place. The final moment. The final command. And as the world narrowed to that single point, as every breath held, as every eye locked onto him, Kael understood something with absolute clarity. There would be no miracle, no sudden awakening, no hidden strength rising at the last second. There was only this moment, this truth, and the silence that had followed him his entire life. The Alpha King's voice cut through the night.
Sharp.
Absolute. Shift. And in that instant, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Shift. The word did not echo. It didn't need to. It landed exactly where it was meant to. In the center of Kael's chest. Heavy. Absolute. Unavoidable. For a moment nothing moved. Not the torches. Not the crowd. Not even the wind that had been threading quietly through the clearing. Everything stilled. Waiting. Watching. Judging. Kael stood at the center of it all. Still as stone. Silent as the thing inside him. He closed his eyes. Not slowly. Not ceremonially. But because he had to. Because if he looked at them, at the faces, the expectations, the certainty in their eyes, he might break before he even began. So he turned inward, reached, like he always did, past the noise, past the pressure, past the weight of what this moment demanded from him, into the place where his wolf should have been. He called, not with words, with instinct, with need, with everything he had been taught to believe was already part of him. Waiting. Ready. His. There was a beat. A single moment suspended in something that almost felt like possibility. And then, nothing. No response. No presence. No shift. Just silence. Kael's breath caught. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. But it was there. A crack. Small. But real. He tried again. Harder this time. Pushing deeper. Forcing the connection. Calling louder. Come on. Still nothing. The silence didn't resist him. It didn't fight back. It simply remained. Unchanged. Unmoved. Unforgiving. A sound moved through the crowd. Faint. Uncertain. A ripple that started somewhere near the edge and spread inward. Confusion. It was subtle. At first. A shift in posture. A tilt of the head. Eyes narrowing as something didn't align with what they expected to see. Kael felt it, even with his eyes closed. He felt them noticing. He felt the first thread of doubt enter the space. His jaw tightened. He inhaled sharply. And tried again. This time, he didn't reach gently. He forced it, drove his consciousness deeper than ever before. Past the silence. Past the emptiness. Searching for anything that would answer him. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. Muscles tightening. Control slipping just slightly. A flicker of something brushed against him. So faint it almost didn't exist.
So wrong it didn't belong.
Kael's breath hitched. There. Something. His eyes snapped open. Too soon. Too fast. The connection vanished instantly.
Gone.
Like it had never been there. But the damage was done. The moment had broken. And the crowd felt it. The ripple became a murmur. Low voices rising, overlapping, building into something harder to contain. Why hasn't he shifted? Is he delaying? No, something's wrong. Kael stood frozen. Not because he couldn't move. Because he didn't know what came next. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the ritual. There was no version of this moment where nothing happened. No script for silence. His chest tightened. Breathing shallow now. Too shallow. He forced air into his lungs. Tried to steady himself. Tried to think. Again. He had to try again. He closed his eyes once more. But this time, there was no calm. No control. Only pressure. Only urgency. Only the growing awareness that every second of silence was making it worse.
Come on.
Just call it. Just feel it. The words echoed in his mind. Voices layered over each other. Riven's voice. The elders. His father. His own. Just call it. He reached inward. Nothing. Just feel it. Nothing. He pushed harder. Nothing. The silence was absolute now. Not passive. Not neutral. It felt final. The murmurs grew louder. No longer cautious. No longer contained. They're waiting. He should have shifted already. That's not normal. Kael's breathing faltered. A sharp inhale that didn't quite fill his lungs. His pulse began to pound in his ears.
Loud.
Too loud. Drowning out everything else. Except the whispers. They cut through anyway. He's the heir. He can't fail. Unless. The word lingered. Unfinished. But understood. Unless he already had. Kael's eyes opened again. The world tilted slightly. Not physically. But something in his perception shifted. The faces around him looked different now. Not supportive. Not expectant. Searching. Measuring. Waiting for confirmation of something they didn't want to believe. Or maybe something they were beginning to hope for. No. The words slipped out under his breath. Too quiet for most. But not for all.
He straightened. Forced his shoulders back.
Tried to reclaim control. Tried to become the version of himself they expected to see. I can do this, he said. This time louder. More for himself than anyone else. No one responded. No one reassured him. Because this wasn't a moment that allowed comfort. Only proof. And he hadn't given it.
Yet. He closed his eyes again. Third time. Fourth.
He didn't know anymore. He reached deeper than ever before. Past thought. Past control. Into something reckless.
Desperate. Raw.
If his wolf was there.
It had to answer now.
It had to. Nothing. The silence slammed into him like a wall. Harder than before. Unyielding. Unbreakable. And something inside him.
Cracked.
The murmurs turned into voices.
Clear now.
Sharp. Unfiltered. He has no wolf. The words cut through everything.
Clean. Precise.
Kael's eyes snapped open. The voice hadn't come from one person. It had come from many. Different directions. Different tones. But the same conclusion. He has no wolf. That's impossible. He's the alpha son. Then what is he? The last question lingered. Heavier than the rest. What is he? Kael's chest tightened painfully. His breath caught halfway in. Wouldn't go further. Wouldn't release. He turned his head slightly. Just enough to see them. The crowd. His pack. Their expressions had changed. Completely. Confusion was gone. Replaced by something colder. Something sharper. Judgment. His gaze moved, searching, until it found the one person who mattered. The Alpha King. His father stood exactly where he had been. Unmoved. Unshaken. Watching. There was no confusion in his eyes. No uncertainty. No hesitation. Only clarity. Only assessment. Only disappointment.
No.
Not even that. Something worse. Recognition. As if what was happening now only confirmed something he had already suspected. Kael's throat tightened. Father. The word came out before he could stop it. A reflex. A plea. A reach for something that might still exist between them. The Alpha King didn't respond. Didn't move.
Didn't speak.
He simply watched, like a ruler observing a failed subject. Not a father watching his son fall apart in front of him. The distance between them widened. Not physically, but completely. Kael felt it. Felt something inside him shift. Not break. Not yet. But move closer to it. He tried again. One last time. Not with control. Not with discipline. With everything. Every ounce of what he had left. Every piece of identity he had built his entire life around. He reached inward and found nothing waiting for him. The silence didn't just remain. It answered him with absence, with finality, with truth. His hands trembled, just slightly, but enough. Enough for everyone to see. A sharp gasp cut through the air. Then another. And another. The crowd surged not forward but in energy. The moment had shifted. From doubt to certainty. He has no wolf. This time it wasn't a question. It wasn't speculation. It was fact. And facts changed everything. Kael's breathing became uneven.
Short.
Sharp. His vision blurred at the edges. Not from tears. From pressure. From the weight of what was happening pressing in from every direction. This wasn't just failure. This was exposure. Every lie. Every performance. Every carefully maintained illusion.
Gone.
In a single moment, he stood there. In the center of the circle. In front of everyone. And for the first time in his life, he had nothing to hide behind. No strength. No identity. No wolf. Just himself. And that wasn't enough. The murmurs became noise. Louder. Harsher. Unforgiving. A curse. He's broken. This shouldn't be possible. Kael swayed slightly. Caught himself. Barely. His body felt disconnected. Like it didn't belong to him anymore. Like he was watching this happen from somewhere just outside of himself. Because accepting it, fully feeling it, would break him. And he wasn't ready to break.
Not yet.
But he was close. Too close. The elder stepped forward.
Slow.
Measured. But the movement cut through the chaos instantly. Silence followed. Not complete.
But forced.
Controlled. All eyes shifted. From Kael. To the authority that would decide what came next. Kael didn't move. Didn't speak. Couldn't. Because deep down, he already knew. There was no recovering from this. No second chance. No hidden redemption waiting at the last second. There was only consequence. And as the silence settled in around him once more, he felt it. The shift. Not in the crowd. Not in the air. In his fate. It had already changed. Already moved beyond his control. Already decided. And in that silence, heavy, final, unavoidable, his future collapsed into a single, undeniable truth. And in that silence, his fate was sealed. Silence did not linger. It descended, heavy, deliberate, absolute. The kind of silence that follows a truth no one wants to accept, but no one can deny. Kael stood at its center.
Exposed.
Stripped of everything that had once defined him, except the one thing that now mattered most. Failure. The murmurs had died. Not because the crowd had nothing to say, but because something far more important was about to happen. Judgment. The elder moved first. Slow steps across ancient stone, each one measured, each one carrying the weight of laws older than memory. His staff struck the ground once, a single, hollow sound that echoed outward like a signal. And just like that, the ritual shifted. This was no longer a test. It was a verdict. Step forward, the elder said. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Authority carried it further than volume ever could. Kael didn't move immediately. Not because he hadn't heard, but because something inside him resisted. A final, instinctive refusal to step willingly into what came next. But resistance didn't matter. Not here.
Not now.
Slowly he obeyed. One step forward, then another, until he stood exactly where he was meant to stand, directly before them. Before the elders. Before the law. Before the truth. The air felt colder here. Sharper. Like even the world itself had drawn a line between what he had been and what he was about to become. The elder's gaze fixed on him. Unblinking. Unfeeling. State your name. The words were ritual. Ancient. Unchanging. Kael's throat tightened. For a moment, just a moment, no sound came. His name. Something so simple. Something so certain. And yet now, it felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. Kael Draven. The words came out lower than he intended. Rougher. Less certain. But they were heard. They were recorded. They were real. The elder nodded once. Not in approval. In acknowledgement. Blood of the Alpha King? Kael hesitated. Not visibly. Not to most. But enough. Enough for the moment to stretch. Enough for the question to feel different now. Before, it had been a statement of pride. Of identity. Of inevitability. Now, it felt like something else. A comparison. A contrast. A measure he had already failed. Yes. The answer came quieter this time. Less certain. The elder continued. Bearer of the heir's mark? Kael's hand twitched slightly at his side. His chest burned faintly beneath his clothing, as if the mark itself knew what was coming. As if it understood it did not belong to him anymore. He nodded. A small movement. Barely there. But enough. Enough to continue. The elder lifted his staff. The motion was slow. Deliberate. Final. Then by the laws of the pack. His voice carried across the clearing. Clear. Unshaken. Unavoidable. We witness this truth. Kael's pulse thundered in his ears. Loud. Relentless. Drowning everything else out. Except the next words. The words that would define everything that came after. The air has no wolf. They did not echo. They did not need to. They landed. Final. Irreversible. A truth spoken aloud became something else entirely. It became law. The reaction was immediate. Not chaos. Not yet. But something close. A ripple of voices surged through the crowd. Sharper now. Harsher. No longer questioning but reacting. A curse. He's broken. This shouldn't be possible. Kael didn't hear all of it. Not clearly. Because something inside him had gone very still. Very quiet. Like the moment before something shatters. The Alpha King moved. Just one step. But it shifted everything. The crowd fell silent instantly. Not out of fear. Out of instinct. Authority had taken control. Kael's gaze lifted. Met his father's eyes. And for a brief moment, something flickered there. Something almost human. Almost. Regret? No. It vanished too quickly. Replaced by something colder. Something harder. Something final. You were born to lead. The Alpha King's voice was quieter now, but it carried further than any shout. Because every word mattered. Every word cut. Raised for it. Another step closer. Prepared for it. Each statement landed like a weight. Building. Stacking. Pressing down. But leadership is not given. His gaze sharpened. It is proven. Kael's chest tightened. He knew what was coming. But knowing didn't make it easier. Power is not assumed. Another step. Closer now. Too close. It is shown. Kael swallowed. His throat felt dry. Tight. Closing. And without a wolf. The pause stretched. Deliberate. Controlled. You have nothing. The words didn't strike. They sank. Deep. Heavy. Permanent. Kael's breath hitched. Father. The words slipped out again. Uncontrolled. Desperate. A reflex he couldn't suppress. And this time, The Alpha King reacted, but not how Kael had hoped, not how he needed. His expression hardened.
Completely.
Do not call me that here. The words were sharp, precise, and far more painful than anything that had come before. Because this wasn't just rejection of his strength. This was rejection of him, of the bond, of the identity he had held on to his entire life. This is not a place for weakness, the Alpha King continued, his voice rising just enough for all to hear. Not for uncertainty. Kael's vision blurred at the edges. This is not a place for failure. Each word tightened the pressure around him. And certainly not. The Alpha King's gaze locked onto him fully now. Unyielding, unforgiving, for an heir who cannot answer the moon. Silence followed. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of judgment. Full of agreement. Full of finality. Kael stood there, unable to move, unable to speak, because there was nothing left to say. Nothing left to argue. Nothing left to prove. The Alpha King turned away.
Just like that.
No hesitation. No second glance. As if Kael was no longer worth looking at. The law is clear. The words were directed at the elders now. Not at him. Not anymore. The elder nodded once. It is. A pause. Short, but absolute. Then, Kael Draven, heir of the Alpha King. The title lingered. Just long enough to remind everyone what he had been. Is hereby rejected. The words fell like a blade.
Clean. Precise.
Final. And something inside Kael
broke.
Not loudly. Not visibly. But completely. It wasn't a single emotion. Not pain. Not anger. Not even despair. It was absence. Like something essential had been removed from him. Something that could never be returned. The crowd reacted.
Gasps.
Whispers. But no one stepped forward. No one protested. No one defended him. Because this was the law. And the law had spoken. Kael stood there. Alone. In a space filled with hundreds of people. More alone than he had ever been in his life. Because now, he was nothing. Not an heir. Not a future. Not even a son. Just a failure.
A mistake.
Something to be removed. The elder lowered his staff. The ritual complete. The judgment final. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because in this world, failure did not end with words. It ended with consequence. The Alpha King's voice came again. Colder now. Detached. Remove the mark. The words were simple, but their meaning, devastating. Kael's head snapped up. For the first time, since the verdict, real fear flickered across his face. No. The word came out quickly.
Too quickly.
A crack in the control he had fought so hard to maintain. Please wait. But the decision had already been made. The guards moved. 2 of them. Stepping forward without hesitation. Without doubt. Without mercy. And as their shadows fell across him, as their hands reached out, as the reality of what was about to happen closed in from every direction, one truth became impossible to ignore. The rejection had only been the beginning. And then came the punishment. They didn't hesitate. They never did. The guards moved in unison. 2 shadows stepping out of the circle's edge, their armor catching the firelight in sharp, fractured glints. No anger. No cruelty in their faces. Just duty. That made it worse. Kael stepped back instinctively. 1 step. Then another. Wait. His voice cracked. Not loud. Not commanding. Human. And that was something this place did not tolerate. Hands grabbed him. Firm. Unyielding. 1 on each arm. Iron grips that didn't tighten out of malice. Only certainty. No, listen. There has to be a mistake. He twisted, not fully resisting, not yet fighting, but trying to create space, to slow the moment, to delay what was coming even by a second. It didn't matter. Nothing did. The guards forced him forward.
Down.
His knees hit the stone. Hard. A sharp jolt shot up his spine, but it barely registered. Because the real impact hadn't come yet. The circle seemed smaller now. Closer. The crowd leaned inward, not physically, but in attention. Watching. Not with sympathy. Not with hesitation. With expectation. This was part of it. This was what happened when someone failed. This was what happened when weakness revealed itself. Kael's breath came faster. Too fast. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning out everything except the sound of his own body turning against him. Please. The words slipped out again. Quieter this time.
Thinner.
He looked up.
Searching.
Not for the crowd. Not for the elders. For him. The Alpha King stood where he had been. Unmoved. Unchanged. Watching. Kael held his gaze. Just for a second. Hoping. For anything. A flicker. A pause. A moment of doubt. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. The realization hit deeper than the fear. There would be no intervention. No mercy. No hesitation. This would happen. The elder stepped forward.
Slow.
Measured. Ancient power seemed to move with him. Not visible. Not loud. But present in the way the air shifted. In the way the torches flickered slightly as he passed. He stopped in front of Kael. Looked down at him. Not with cruelty. With finality. You carry a symbol you have not earned. The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. They were truth. And truth, in this place, was absolute. Kael shook his head quickly. No, just give me time. I can fix this. There is nothing to fix. The elder's voice cut through him.
Clean.
Unforgiving. Final. Kael's chest tightened. Please. But the elder was already lifting his hand. The motion slow. Deliberate. Inevitable. A faint glow began to gather around his fingers. Soft at first. Barely visible. Then brighter. Stronger. Ancient.
Kael saw it.
And something inside him snapped. No, wait. He struggled now. For real. Pulling against the guards, muscles straining, breath breaking as panic surged fully into him. This wasn't ritual anymore. This was loss.
Permanent.
Irreversible. They forced him down harder. Pinned him. One hand against his shoulder. The other pressing his arm into the stone.
Cold.
Unmoving. Unyielding. Kael's chest heaved. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. The glow intensified.
Closer now.
Too close. No, please. The words tore out of him. Not controlled. Not measured.
Raw.
Human. Desperate. The elder's hand descended. And then,
pain.
Not sharp. Not immediate. It started as heat. A sudden, overwhelming heat at the center of his chest. Then it burned. White hot. Exploding outward through his body like something tearing itself free from the inside. Kael screamed. The sound ripped from his throat, uncontrolled, breaking through the silence and scattering it into fragments. His back arched. Muscles locked. Every nerve igniting at once. It wasn't just physical. It was deeper. Much deeper. Like something woven into his very existence was being pulled out. Ripped away. Unmade. The mark. Not just a symbol. A bond. A claim. A piece of who he was supposed to be. And it was being taken.
By force.
Stop. His voice cracked into something unrecognizable. His hands clawed at the ground, fingers scraping against stone, searching for anything to hold on to. Anything to anchor him. There was nothing. Only the pain. Relentless. Endless. Consuming. And then, something shifted. Not outside. Inside. Deep beneath the pain. Beneath the tearing. Beneath the breaking. Something answered. Not his wolf. Not even close. This was different. Ancient. Cold.
Vast.
It didn't rise gently. It surged. Violent.
Awake.
Kael's scream cut off abruptly. His body went rigid. Eyes snapping open.
Wide. Unseeing.
But not empty. Something was there. For a moment. Just a moment. He wasn't alone inside himself. Something else looked through him. Not with confusion. Not with fear. With awareness. With hunger. With something that felt
old.
Older than the pack. Older than the laws. Older than the moon watching above. The torches flickered violently. The air tightened. The ground beneath him seemed to hum with something that didn't belong. The elder's hand faltered. Just slightly. Enough to notice. Enough to matter, but not enough to stop. Because just as quickly as it came, it was gone, vanished, like it had never been there. The presence withdrew, the connection snapped, and the pain returned in full, stronger, sharper, final. Kael screamed again, this time shorter, weaker, breaking, until it stopped, abruptly, completely. The glow faded. The elder pulled his hand back, and the mark was gone. Not burned, not scarred, erased, as if it had never existed. Kael collapsed forward. His body hit the stone with a dull, hollow sound. No strength left to catch himself. No energy left to resist. His breathing came in shallow, uneven bursts. Barely there. His fingers twitched once, then stilled. The world around him felt distant, muted, like he was no longer fully part of it. So it is done. The elder's voice sounded far away, detached, unimportant, because Kael couldn't feel anything anymore. Not the pain, not the fear, not the humiliation. Nothing. Just empty. The Alpha King turned. Already done. Already moving on. Exile him. The words landed without weight, because Kael had nothing left to feel them with. His head lifted slightly. Slow. Delayed. What? The sound barely formed, barely existed. You are no longer part of this pack. The Alpha King didn't look back. Didn't need to. You have no place here. Each word stripped something else away. Not that there was much left. You will leave before sunrise. Final. Absolute. Unquestioned. The guards moved again. Hands on him. Pulling him up. His legs didn't respond at first. Then barely did. Unsteady. Uncertain. Like they didn't belong to him anymore. Kael didn't fight. Didn't speak. Didn't beg. Because something inside him had gone very, very quiet. Not broken. Not completely. But distant. Disconnected. They dragged him. Not roughly. Not cruelly. Just efficiently. The crowd parted. Stepping back. Creating space. Not out of respect. Out of rejection. As if proximity itself was a risk. As if whatever he was now could spread, could corrupt, could taint. No one reached out. No one spoke. No one looked at him the same way again. Because the Kael they knew didn't exist anymore. The clearing faded behind him. The torches dimmed. The voices disappeared. The world narrowed to movement, to breath, to the hollow space where something used to be. And beneath that, something else stirred. Faint. Almost imperceptible. But there. Alive. Waiting. Kael's head tilted slightly. Just for a second. His brow tightening in the smallest of reactions. Not conscious. Not deliberate. Instinct. Because something deep inside him, something buried beneath the silence, had not been erased. It had not been taken. It had not been destroyed. It had been touched. And now, it was awake. The guards dragged him past the edge of the clearing, past the boundary, toward the darkness beyond. And Kael, broken, empty, exiled, didn't look back. Because he couldn't. Because there was nothing left behind worth seeing. But as the night closed in around him, as the distance grew, as the world he had known disappeared into shadow, one truth remained. Unseen, unspoken, ununderstood. Because something inside him had just awakened. The world did not end with a scream. It ended with silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had been punished into stillness. The gates of the pack did not close gently behind him. They slammed. A deep, final sound that echoed through the valley like a verdict being sealed into stone. The rejected heir stumbled forward as the force of it pushed him into the earth beyond the border stones, beyond protection, beyond law, beyond blood, beyond home. Behind him, the torches of the Alpha's domain burned in steady lines, warm and untouched, as if nothing had changed, as if he had never mattered. And then came the voices. Not one, not two, many, cold, unified, certain. He has no wolf. He is nothing. Let the wild decide what he becomes. The words did not chase him. They didn't need to. They had already done their damage. The final insult was not what they said. It was the way the gates stopped moving. Like the world had already forgotten him. The rejected heir stood at the edge of the boundary stones, one foot still trembling from impact, the other already belonging to nowhere.
He did not speak.
He did not plead. Not anymore. Because even grief has limits before it turns into something quieter, something colder, something deeper. And then, a step backward. The first step into exile. The forest beyond the Packlands was not welcoming. It never had been meant to be. Trees rose like skeletal watchers, their branches tangled overhead like broken hands refusing to let go of the sky. Wind moved differently here. Not freely, not gently, but observing. The rejected heir walked. At first it was instinct, survival, muscle memory of a life where movement meant escape. But after a while, even that faded. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat stopped trying to outrun itself. And the world stopped shouting at him. There were no voices now. No judgment. No lineage. No name. Only footsteps pressing into soil that did not care who he had been. The further he went, the quieter he became. Not just outside. Inside. He stopped flinching at every sound. Stopped expecting someone to call him back. Stopped imagining a hand reaching out for mercy. Because none were coming. And somewhere, in that unbearable stillness, something unfamiliar began to form. Not hope.
Not despair.
Something more dangerous.
Clarity.
He stopped near a fallen tree. The bark was stripped in long, old scars, like something massive had once dragged itself through this place and refused to be forgotten. He sat. Not because he was tired, but because for the first time, there was nowhere left to be thrown. His fingers touched the ground. Cold.
Real.
Unmoving. You have no wolf, they had said. The words returned now, not as pain, but as echoes. Not sharp. Not breaking. Just present. He inhaled slowly. And for the first time, he did not try to force strength into himself. He did not beg for something to awaken. He did not search for approval in the silence. Instead, he listened. To himself. Not as the heir. Not as the rejected. But as something stripped bare enough to finally hear what remained underneath everything else. And what he heard was not emptiness. It was pressure. A presence.
Coiled.
Waiting.
Not gone.
Not missing. Just unrecognized. His fingers tightened against the earth. A slow realization forming, not through thought, but through sensation. As if something inside him had been holding its breath longer than he had been alive. And it was still waiting. The forest shifted. Subtle at first. A hesitation in the wind. A pause in the rustling leaves. Then, silence again. But this silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was aware. The rejected heir lifted his head slightly. The air around him felt heavier. Not oppressive. Reverent. Like the world had just noticed something it did not understand. His pulse slowed further. Not from fear, but from recognition. Something in him responded, not like a wolf calling to the moon, but like something older responding to being seen. His breath sharpened. And then, it happened. Not a transformation. Not a surge. A unveiling. Deep within him, something uncoiled. Not breaking free, but remembering itself. His eyes flickered, not changing shape, but changing depth. The space around him tightened. The trees creaked faintly, as if leaning away from him, as if listening, as if reconsidering what he was. No wolf, he whispered again. But this time, it didn't sound like truth. It sounded like ignorance. The forest reacted. Not violently, not immediately, but deliberately. A ripple passed through the ground beneath him. Leaves lifted without wind. Branches tilted at unnatural angles. Even the distant calls of nocturnal creatures stopped mid-sound. Something was wrong, or something was awakening. The rejected heir stood slowly. His movements were no longer uncertain, no longer fractured. Each step he took now felt anchored, like the earth recognized him more than it rejected him. A faint pressure built in the air around his chest. Not suffocation. Alignment. The deeper he breathed, the more the world responded. Not to command, not to dominance, but to presence. And somewhere beyond the visible trees, something moved. At first, it was just shadows, between trunks that should not have held anything but darkness. Then came the sound. Not a growl, not a howl. Something more deliberate, controlled, watching. The rejected air stopped. The forest did not. It kept shifting around him, bending in subtle patterns, like a living thing adjusting its posture around a new predator in its midst. But these were not wolves. He felt that immediately. Not pack energy. Not familiar bloodlines. Something detached. Ancient in a different way. Unbound. One shape stepped into partial view. Then another. Then several more. Not circling like hunters, but positioning like witnesses. Observers. Judges. The kind that did not rush. Because they already knew the outcome. The air thickened again. The pressure around him sharpened. And yet, he did not move. Something inside him clicked into place. Not violently. Not dramatically. But irrevocably. The fear that had lived in him for years. Fear of rejection. Fear of being nothing. Fear of being less. It didn't disappear. It fell away. Like a shell that had finally served its purpose. His shoulders lowered slightly. Not in surrender. In control. The creatures in the trees shifted again. Uncertainty, now threading through their stillness. They could feel it. Something had changed. The prey had stopped behaving like prey. And the forest itself seemed unsure what to call him now. He took one step forward. Then another. No hesitation. No instinct to flee. Just motion guided by something deeper than survival. Something that no longer asked for permission to exist. The air around him responded. Not bending, but acknowledging. Fear had once been loud in him. It had shaped his silence, his obedience, his breaking. But now, it was quiet, not erased, but overridden, replaced by something steadier, something unshakable. He was still alone, still exiled, still standing beyond the borders of everything he once belonged to. But none of that felt like loss anymore. It felt like distance. And distance could be crossed. Or controlled. The watching shapes in the trees shifted again, more clearly this time. Not approaching. Not retreating. Waiting for instruction from a hierarchy that no longer made sense. Because something new had entered the system. And it did not recognize old rules. Neither did he. The rejected air exhaled slowly. The forest exhaled with him. And for the first time, the silence did not feel empty. It felt obedient. His eyes lifted toward the shadows between the trees, where things older than wolves still waited to decide what he was. But he did not lower his gaze. He did not ask for permission. He did not search for identity in their presence. He simply stood, fully, completely, unclaimed, unowned, and aware. Then the thought settled, not spoken aloud, but felt through every inch of the world around him. This was no longer exile. This was recognition. And something in the darkness finally shifted, as if preparing to respond. Because for the first time, the rejected air was no longer prey.